What's up YouTube? This is Zack Schnepf, and today I'm going to continue my series on advanced post-processing workflow. In the last episode I introduced using adjustment layers and also using luminosity selections to help make targeted tonality changes to different areas of the images. And we've made some really good progress so far. You can see if I Alt or Option click this background layer, you can see all the different adjustment layers and the effects that they're having. So yeah, we've made some good progress, and in this episode I want to continue to fine-tune the tonality with more adjustment layers and continue with the luminosity selections as well. Also, I want to remove a little bit of this blue color cast that's starting to show up. As you add contrast, sometimes you'll see different color cast maybe show up, or saturation boost, and so these are just things you kind of deal with throughout the workflow. I'll also be starting some color adjustment layers as well to help kind of fine-tune the color. So let's jump right into it and get started. So one concept that I've talked about before, but it continues to be a theme throughout my workflow, is to kind of take stock and reevaluate the image, see where we're at, and kind of figure out which direction I want to go in or what I want to do. So again, I did start to notice that there was a little bit of a bluish cast, especially here in like the shadows. So I want to warm up the image overall, and I also think it's getting a little bit dark down in the shadows, so I will help control those shadows, bring back some of that shadow detail. And I also want to lighten up the image overall, and I want some of these lighter areas where the light's hitting the hills to stand out more. So I'll be creating some more levels adjustment layers to help accentuate that lighting. So I'll start with the accentuating that lighting first. So I'm going to click up on my top layer here. You might notice that my interface looks a little bit different from the last video. I upgraded to the version 6 of the TKaction panel. So it looks a little bit different. Everything else is pretty much the same. And again, all the tools that we were using before are still there. They're just laid out a little bit differently. And like the adjustment layers are now consolidated under one button, which I think is a more elegant design. And yeah, so far I'm really liking it. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to head up to the adjustment layer kind of selection area here in the new version 6 TKaction panel, and click on a new levels adjustment layer. And let's increase the highlights. So let's pull this highlight slider to the left, and I actually want to go pretty far with it. And again, then I'll just control those highlights later. But I definitely want to help accentuate more of this lighting and help that tree stand out even more. So I'm going too far on purpose. Yeah, just fine tune that a little bit. Okay, I think that actually looks pretty good. And let's preview that on and off. It's definitely too strong, but that's okay. So now I will go in with maybe like a lights 1. Let's have a look. Yeah, it looks pretty good. And let's load that as a selection. I'll hide the marching ants. Load up the brush tool, and again, we'll kind of continue like the last time, similar pattern. And I'll load my opacity at 50% with black as my foreground color, and let's just go back over and kind of recover some of those highlight tones that were feeling a little bit too bright. Some of these highlights are feeling a little bit bright down here as well. I don't mind these highlights here. I'm going to leave those. I'm just going to increase the contrast later. Let me zoom in a little bit. And I will control these highlights in the tree as well. I just want to be really conservative with it because I want that to stand out, but I don't want those tones I don't want to lose too much information on those highlight tones. But that looks pretty good. Let me zoom back out. And I'll go over this sky area a few more times and just recover those highlight tones. And you can see I'm dipping down into that transition area as well, or the transition zone, and it's looking pretty good. So let's preview that on and off again. Yep, that looks good. That's kind of the effect I'm going for. And now let's do another levels adjustment layer on top of this. Let me just make sure there's no active selections. Good. And I'm going to load a new levels adjustment layer. And so this adjustment layer, I wanted to target some of these midtones here and help increase the contrast, and again, make that area stand out more, especially here in the center. For this adjustment, I want to use a mid-tone luminosity selection. And Tony sent me a message and said there's actually a better way of doing it than the way I was doing it before. So if you go into this layer mask module as part of the TKaction panel, you can load these different luminosity selections directly into the mask. And that way you're bypassing the selection process and you keep the whole process 16-bit. If you're using the selection tool, you're working in 8-bit, which I haven't found to be too much of an issue. But again, to help keep the image degradation down and keep the quality as high as possible, if you can, just use these and you can load that 16-bit image information right into the mask. So let's try like a midtones 2, and you can see if I hit the midtones 2, you can see it loaded right into the mask. So that's what this whole module does. It's pretty cool. So again, this is just another way of doing the same thing, but again, keeping the whole process 16-bit. So that looks good. That's what I want to use. And now let's make some contrast adjustment here now that we have this luminosity mask loaded in. So I'll pull up the highlights a little bit more, and I'll pull the mid-tone slider to the right, compress those tones together, effectively increasing the contrast, and let's see how that's looking. Let's preview that on and off. Again, it's pretty subtle, but really, really like it. It's looking really good. So I might go just a little bit further. Yeah, I really like that high contrast look. That's really helping that the lighting pop. So let's option click on the background layer again, just kind of take a look at the overall. And you can see, yeah, we're really making a lot of progress and helping to accentuate the lighting that was there. So it's looking really good. The shadows are feeling a bit dark to me though. So I do want to go back and control some of these shadows and kind of open them up a little bit, bring out some of that shadow detail, and just help it feel not so heavy and dark down there. Let's first find which of these adjustment layers is causing it to be the darkest. Definitely not that one. Yep, there's definitely some shadow tones to be recovered in the second one here. That one looks fine. There's definitely in the fourth one as well. I can recover some of that. And that's a good start. So let me just deselect and make sure that there's no active selections. And now I'm going to load a luminosity selection, just a darks 3 to help isolate those. So I'm going to go back to the rapid mask module here, and I'm going to load a darks 3. Take a look at that. That looks like it's going to isolate those shadows really well. So that looks like a really useful luminosity selection. So let's load that. And let's go back to the second one here. And again, with 50% loaded, let me just open up these shadows a little bit more. Not too much though. That's actually fine. I don't feel like it's really that heavy now after making some of those adjustments. So I'll deselect and kind of take a look at what we've just done. That looks pretty good. Up here with no selection active, I'm just going to go over this sky area and a little bit into the transition zone to remove a little bit of this adjustment layer, or the effect of it. Just freehand blending, no selection. It feels good. I like that. Looks good. Okay, so now we've fine-tuned some of those tonalities a little bit more. I definitely like the tonal balance and how things are looking right now. So let's move on to some color cast removal and then some color adjustment layers and just overall color adjustments and balance. So I'm going to move up to this top layer. I like to keep all my tonality adjustments below here in the layer palette. Actually, I'm going to expand this a little bit too, since we're adding more layers. And then I keep my color adjustments above, and that's just for my own brain keeping things in order. I don't think it matters that much which order you have those in, but just for my own mind. So there are several ways of removing a color cast from an image or changing the overall color balance. So the first way I want to try is with a selective color adjustment layer. So I'll load this selective color adjustment layer into the layer palette here, and I'm going to choose blues, and then I'm going to neutralize some of the blues. So you can see if I pull this to the left, it accentuates those blues and makes them much stronger. I want to neutralize those blues a bit, so I'm going to pull it to the right, and actually quite a bit. Pretty much like all the way. And that looks good. And let's go up to the magenta slider as well. So you can see you can pull it to the green side, the magenta side. I actually kind of like it a little bit on the green side. So I think I will leave it there. And I'll do the same thing with the cyan red slider. Just kind of pull it back and forth. See which way. Actually, that one feels pretty balanced already. So I'll just leave that one at 0. So let me just preview that on and off. Yep, that definitely helped remove some of that bluish cast. Let me load the cyans as well, and let's see if there's any cyans that need balancing. Yep, so I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to pull the yellow slider to the right and neutralize some of that blue or cyan. And same thing here. This time I'm actually going to pull the magenta slider to the right a little bit. Just kind of richen up those tones. And then we'll do the same thing here. And I'll actually pull this just a little bit to the left toward the red side. And let's preview that on and off. Again, it's kind of subtle, but it definitely helped remove that blue cast that was bothering me. So that was pretty effective. So yeah, we can just move on. Another way of doing or removing some color cast is with the color balance tool, adjustment layer. So let's load color balance. So you can see color balance, you can target either highlights, midtones, or shadows. So since we were working mainly in the shadows there, I'll leave those alone pretty much. Let's start with the midtones and see if there's any blue or any other color cast that needs to be removed. This is a pretty strong tool. You have to be kind of careful with it. You can go too far very quickly. But let me just pull this slider. You can see you can change the balance of color in the image, which with each of these sliders. So if we want to warm it up a little bit, maybe I'll dial in a little bit of yellow, a little bit of red, and then find the balance point here as well. And let's preview that on and off. Yeah, it looks pretty good. I don't mind there being a little bit of blue, so I may decide later not to have this active. But you can see this does give you a good amount of control in removing color cast and also just kind of pushing the colors one way or another. If you want to warm it up, cool it down, go a little more magenta, this is a great tool to do that. So for now, I'm just going to turn off this color balance adjustment layer, and I may turn that back on later. We'll see. So now that I've made a few more adjustments, let me kind of zoom in and take a look. So here's at 100%. Let's kind of take a look at some areas and see if I need to fine tune them some more. It's looking pretty good. I think I can increase the contrast even a little bit more, maybe control the highlights a little bit on this hill here. And also in the tree, I may increase the contrast and also maybe just recover some of the highlights a little bit. So let's zoom back out. And let me take a look at this one again. Yeah, it looks really good. I like that. So I'm going to click on this layer since I'm going to make another tonality adjustment. And I want it to be below the color adjustments. And let's load up another levels adjustment layer. I'm not going to load any luminosity mask into this layer mask yet. So let me zoom in a little bit, and I'm going to pull up the highlights. Again, I'm going to go a little bit too far on purpose, and I'm also going to increase the contrast there. And I'm mainly just looking at this area of the image. I will probably remove it from the rest of the image. I'm going to kind of target the center area. I want to increase that contrast, maybe not quite this much. Let me preview that on and off. Yeah, that looks pretty good. And then I'll help control those highlights in the next step. Yeah, I mean, I don't mind that contrast kind of overall. It's definitely a little bit too bright up here in the sky, so I definitely want to remove it there. It is bringing some of those really dark tones into the shadows again, so I'll probably control that as well. But overall, I really like the added contrast here in the middle of the image, helping to kind of pull my eye into that center area of the image. So I just noticed that because we added even more contrast there, that blue cast is showing up even a little bit more again. So I am actually going to load this warming color balance layer. And we can always go back and readjust this later too. So if I need to warm it up some more, I can just re-edit this at any point. So that's one of the beauties of adjustment layers. Very handy, always re-editable. So I definitely want to recover these highlight tones up here. So I'm going to load the brush tool and click on that layer mask. And I will load a luminosity selection to help me target the tones that I want to remove. So I could either go with a lights 2. Yeah, I think that's definitely going to be the selection I want to use this time. You can see that isolates those highlight tones really well. All those darker tones are very black, so they won't be affected much at all. So let's load this as a selection. And yes. So I'm going to go in at 75% opacity and recover those highlight tones up in the sky here. And to make another pass, really want to preserve those. They're already pretty bright. In fact, I may look at some other adjustment layers and see if any other layers, oh yeah, like this one can be recovered a little bit. So let me go in at just 50% and recover just a little bit more of those highlight tones. That's good. So I'm definitely pretty happy overall with how things are looking. One thing you'll start to notice as you stack a bunch of different adjustment layers like this is that Photoshop has a hard time interpreting all that information. So you'll start to see little kind of posterization kind of steps in between in a gradient. But if you zoom into 100%, you'll notice that those aren't actually there. It's just the way that Photoshop is interpreting all these different adjustment layers. You can also see it if you just flatten the image. So if I flatten this image down, all of that posterization and kind of gradient stepping goes away. Let me go back in my history because I don't want a flat image, but I just wanted to illustrate that. If you start seeing that, don't panic. As long as you're working in 16-bit mode, it's probably just the software trying to interpret all of those changes. So I'm just going to take another look, again, reevaluate, and I do want to recover some of these shadow tones that I overdid a little bit with this levels adjustment here. So I cleared out my alpha channels. I'm going to load Darks 3. That's going to do a good job again of isolating those shadow tones. Load that as a selection. Click on my mask. Let's hide those marching ants. And maybe let's just recover a little bit of that shadow information. So I'll get it at 50% with that Darks 3 luminosity selection active, and just pull a little bit of that information back in those shadows. And let me deselect, and let's zoom in. And I do want to control some of these highlights as well. Some of them are a little bit strong on the tree and definitely on this hillside over here. So I'm going to load a Lights 2 again. So let me just make sure there's no active alpha channels. Oops, Lights 3, let's go with Lights 2. That's going to help isolate those tones really well. Load that as a selection. Hide the marching ants. And let's look for, so this is the adjustment layer that's causing these to be really bright. And again, I want some of that, but not quite that strong. I want a little bit more detail there. So I'm going to load just 30% opacity and just go over this to tone it down just a little bit. Same thing in the tree. I want that to stand out, but I also want to pull that back just a little bit. One more on this hillside, maybe one more, and that looks pretty good. Let me zoom out. Yeah, that feels really good, and I like where we're at here. I like the look of this so far. So let me deselect, and yeah, I'm pretty happy. So I think it's time to move on to the next step. I might do a little bit of fine tuning, but I think this is pretty good. You get the idea. So one more time, let's go down to the background layer here, and let's option click just to kind of see just how much we did with all of these targeted adjustment layers. Adjustment layers are incredibly powerful, especially when you can target different tonalities and colors. I mean, it's pretty incredible. I mean, that's the beauty and power of Photoshop there. So this really is much more realizing kind of that pre-visualized idea of how I remembered it and how I wanted it to look in this image. So it's feeling pretty good. I like the balance of tones. I definitely like how much more emphasis there is on the tree and in the hills here. Yeah, it really helps accentuate the light and atmosphere that was so incredible on this particular morning. So I think that's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. And in the next episode, I think we'll do maybe just a tiny bit more fine tuning, possibly. And also I'll talk about preparing this image for sharing in different mediums. So for print and for web in particular. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed it, and See you in the next episode.